Hello, and thank you for streaming the recorded version of the webinar, Alaska and the Lower 48, Forging Common Cause Around Climate Impacts and Solutions. Before launching into the recording, I'd like to present a brief overview of the Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign. My name is Sarah Schumann, and I have served as the coordinator of this campaign since its inception in early 2022. The Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign is a grassroots initiative that provides commercial fishermen, fisheries associations, and seafood businesses with tools, networking, access, and knowledge to advocate for robust climate solutions that work for U.S. fisheries and not at their expense. The campaign mobilizes bottom-up advocacy by strengthening networks among fishing industry members in diverse regions, enhancing capacity to participate in climate and energy planning processes, and offering policy, technical, and communications expertise to support active and informed engagement by commercial fishing industry members in shaping policy outcomes. The campaign is not a centralized entity that speaks with a single voice. Instead, it's a platform that provides opportunities, information, and capacity building to help individuals, businesses, and organizations within the fishing industry develop and amplify their own statements in support of fishery-friendly climate action. In the first year of the campaign, 20 organizations and 62 individuals and businesses in the commercial fishing industry have utilized this platform to submit letters and issue statements calling on policymakers at multiple levels to support fishery-friendly climate action. This campaign is a big tent, and all members of the fishing industry are welcome to participate by joining our email listserv, attending our webinars, and utilizing the listserv to circulate your own sign-on letters. We hope to create an encouraging and supportive atmosphere that celebrates the diversity in our industry while also generating shared momentum around one of the most critical issues of our times. More information can be found at fisheryfriendlyclimateaction.org. Thank you for your interest and enjoy this wonderful webinar. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted through the Fishery Friendly Climate Action Campaign. This is the second in a 4-part winter webinar series that we're hosting this winter to take advantage of what is for most of us our off season, not so for, I know, the West Coast crab fleet and some others for which this is their busy season, which is again why we're recording these webinars so that everybody can have a chance to see them. Fishery-friendly climate solutions, which we will be talking about a bit today, are solutions that, decarbonization solutions that simultaneously reduce, sequester, or avoid greenhouse gas emissions at scales sufficient to hold warming well below 2 degrees centigrade, while also avoiding collateral impacts on fishery ecosystems, avoiding interference with the harvest and provision of wild seafood for the public, wherever possible, contributing co-benefits that enhance the resilience of these ecosystems to climate change and other stressors, and facilitating the voluntary adoption of cost-effective, locally appropriate technologies and practices to reduce fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions by fishing vessels and shoreside businesses. So I wanted to provide that definition because that is sort of the central definition that all of the different policy recommendations that have been circulated through the Fishery-Friendly Climate Action Campaign this year have had at their heart. That helps policymakers understand sort of where we're trying to align as an industry. And alignment is really sort of the mission of this particular webinar. We all know that this winter's closure of several Alaskan crab fisheries is the latest in a string of climate-induced disruptions. And we also know that in the lower 48, there are many fishermen who are grappling with the potentially serious impacts of one of the leading solutions proposed to combat the root causes of climate change, and that is offshore wind energy development. Both of these trends are not only urgent in their own right, but are also symbolic of the kinds of tensions and trade-offs that are likely to become more commonplace as the climate crisis worsens and the energy transition gets underway. The purpose of this webinar is to foster an inter-regional dialogue among fishermen in Alaska and the lower 48 around both the impacts of climate change and the impacts of some of those climate solutions that are designed to get at the root causes of climate change. We're going to learn how fishermen and their organizations are mobilizing around these issues, and then we'll discuss how we can best support each other across regions through complementary message frameworks and network building. So we have 6 wonderful panelists representing Alaska, the West Coast, and the Northeast. We are going to kick it off with Jamie Goen. I will introduce Jamie. And then Jamie, like all 6 of our panelists, will have about 5 minutes to give us a lightning presentation in response to the following 2 questions. Those questions are, what are the most pressing issues and concerns related to climate impacts and climate solutions in your region? And how are you and your colleagues in the local fishing industry mobilizing around them? So Jamie is the executive director of the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers, an association representing crab harvesters, whose mission is to be stewards of the crab resource and the environment, and to provide economic stability to their industry and Alaska's fishing communities, Alaska's coastal communities. Jamie is on the executive committee of the Alaska Ocean Acidification Network and a board member of the United Fishermen of Alaska. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll go through some brief talking points here, and then I look forward to a lively dialogue later in this webinar. Alaska's crab industry has a lot to deal with right now. As many of you know, our fishermen have been rocked by an immediate economic crisis with the crab stock collapse and fishery closures now in their 2nd year and thought to be in part climate-induced. So that's number 1 for us. On top of the immediate economic crisis, and number 2, there's a need for more conservation measures to help crab stocks rebuild from historic lows in the face of multiple stressors and growing uncertainty. And number 3, a need to look bigger picture and longer term and advance remedies to the root cause of ocean warming, climate change, and ocean acidification. We need to be dealing with each of these levels. And while doing that, we also need to be continuing to support funding and more science and research. And look, we know all fishermen have a variety of perspectives about climate change. We can debate the magnitude and whether this is really different than past ocean cycles. But what we know through the science available is that carbon emissions are having an effect on climate, and the ocean is warming and becoming more acidic as a consequence, with a wide range of estimated timescales and magnitude. We used to think climate change was something in the distant future, but with Alaska crab and others like the Gulf of Alaska cod fishery during the last big heat wave, we're encountering it now. We are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. We now face a situation that is much larger than a typical fishery management decisions, and with a management and regulatory system not equipped to handle it. We need to make climate action a priority, and I appreciate forums like this one that bring solutions-oriented people together. And it would be helpful to work across gear groups and across regions in the country to, number 1, speed up the fishery disaster process. Number 2, build a more responsive, flexible management system. And number 3, find and support useful and practical solutions to mitigate and/or reduce carbon emissions. To be honest, crabbers have been focused on number 1 and 2 given the crisis we are in, but we must also address number 3. If we can be on the side of emissions reduction and mitigation, we are not only helping slow down the ocean warming trend, but also address the root cause of ocean acidification, which is another important issue for the future viability of the crab fishery. One way is to make sure our elected officials know this is important to us. Next is to look into more specifics about what we support. And there are others on this webinar who have dug much deeper into the specifics than I have so far. Some of what I know of in Alaska are the Alaska Ocean Acidification Network, which produced a series of podcasts called The Future Oceans, which explained carbon policy solutions for Alaska. And if you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do so. They did a really good job producing that podcast series. Also, the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association, or ALFA, is pioneering work around climate solutions, including supporting a fee on carbon, developing and supporting nature-based climate solutions and local stewardship, supporting the clean energy movement, and working to reduce their fleet's carbon footprint by converting to hybrid power with a zero emission target. And I think they have a vessel being converted to hybrid power soon, which is really exciting. I've focused here today on solutions around high-level root causes of climate change and not on the immediate economic crisis of the crab fleet and the crab-dependent fishing communities, nor on the additional conservation measures and more flexible responsive management needed to address fisheries suffering a collapse. However, those are also important aspects where I think a more coordinated national effort by fishermen could help us all, whether we are suffering a climate-induced fisheries disaster now or in the future. In closing, US fishermen have an important role to play in slowing down the rate of climate change in a way that supports fishermen and fishing communities and keeps fisheries sustainable. It doesn't mean all fishing vessels must move to hybrid electric. There are countless ways to play a role. It could mean revising seafood supply chains to move toward more local access from sea to table to reduce carbon footprint. It could mean creating more carbon dioxide absorbing kelp farms in key areas. There are many solutions and they will differ by region, fishery, and community, and it's forums like this that will help us get there. So thanks to the Fishery Friendly Climate Action for putting this event on, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We really appreciate everything that you and your fleet are doing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Next up, we have Lori Steele. Lori is the Executive Director of the West Coast Seafood Processors Association, headquartered in Astoria, Oregon. The West Coast Seafood Processors Association membership includes most major and many minor shore-based processors of groundfish, crab, shrimp, and salmon in Washington, Oregon, and California. Thank you for joining us today, Lori. You have the floor.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for organizing this panel. I'll jump right into it since time is short. And I guess I'll start with, some of the concerns around the climate impacts in our region, I think are largely the same across all the regions in the country. And that is really the impacts of climate change on our marine ecosystems and our fisheries. Our fishing industry is on the front lines of climate change. We're seeing it and experiencing it firsthand. And it's not looking good. It's all very concerning. A lot of the long-term impacts are still very unclear, and the cumulative impacts are largely unknown. I think perhaps what's most concerning at all is just the general uncertainty about the future of our environment and of our fisheries. So, looking at climate solutions and some of the approaches that are being taken to tackle the climate crisis, there's obviously significant concern about the rush to get to a solution before fully understanding the problem or the potential impacts of the solutions. As Jamie mentioned, we need to be looking bigger picture and longer term. Offshore wind development is a prime example of this. And it's something you mentioned in your introductory remarks. This is really the biggest thing we're facing here on the West Coast, and I think as a fishing industry as a whole. Offshore wind development, is not really the green energy that it's touted to be. And as with a lot of these rushes to find solutions, ultimately, there may not be a net gain or a net benefit when it comes to these kinds of solutions, especially ones that threaten our industry and can potentially impact food production and food security. So here on the West Coast, we are really, facing this rush to develop offshore wind. The federal government, I think, as most everyone knows, is taking a leap before you look approach when it comes to offshore wind development. It's charging forward despite all of the unknowns and impacts that are not well analyzed or well understood. And as we see the push to develop offshore wind on the West Coast, we're not seeing the government change anything based on lessons learned on the East Coast or lessons learned in other regions. BOEM is charging forward with privatizing and industrializing our oceans, and our industry is getting steamrolled in the process. We don't have a seat at the table. Our input isn't getting considered, and we're seeing this in all regions across the board. We stand to lose a lot with offshore wind development, and that goes right from the environment to our economy to our communities. And I think another part of the collective challenge that we're facing in our industry regarding offshore wind development across the board is that the contributions of the fishing and seafood industry towards fighting the climate crisis aren't being acknowledged or accounted for. Our industry plays a huge part in finding solutions. We are a sustainable industry and we pride ourselves on sustainability. We provide high volumes of protein with the lowest carbon footprint of any other protein source in the world. We're capable of feeding the world and its ever increasing population with the least environmental impact. We enhance local, regional, and national food security, which will become even more critical moving forward. So, steamrolling us and putting us out of business in the rush to find solutions to the climate crisis is incredibly short-sighted. We are part of the solution, and we as an industry here on the West Coast have really been working to try to make people understand that. We've mobilized our industry here on the West Coast, really at the grassroots level, in Oregon, in Washington, with our local communities and with our state and federal legislators. We've come together as commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, processors, support businesses, researchers, environmentalists, marine scientists, and through our efforts, we're realizing that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about the climate crisis, about offshore wind development, and about the fishing industry. So we've been really making an effort to try to educate and inform our community members, our local legislators, and our representatives about the concerns we have about offshore wind development and about the importance of our industry to rural coastal communities. Our industry has a very important story to tell and a very important role in tackling the climate crisis. And it really should be a positive story. It's a story that most people don't understand. So we've really been trying to get the word out there and get people to really understand that we are stewards of the environment. We are part of the solution, and the federal government needs to listen to us. So I'll stop there. I'm really looking forward to further discussion as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Lori, and I'm especially glad that you brought up sort of that need to tell that story and highlighted the work that you're already doing in your region to tell that story. And it's something that I think the rest of our speakers are also thinking about, and it's interesting to compare notes and figure out how we can work together to do that. Thank you, Lori. So next up, we have Chris Brown. Chris is a fisherman in Point Judith, Rhode Island. Chris, I'm getting some feedback. Okay, it's better now. Chris is a fisherman in Point Judith, Rhode Island, where he owns and captains 2 inshore draggers, the FV Proud Mary and the FV Vital Spark. He is also the board president of the Seafood Harvesters of America, a board member of the Commercial Fisheries Center of Rhode Island, which incidentally was one of the founding organizations behind the fishery-friendly climate action campaign, a member of the Rhode Island Fisheries Advisory Board on offshore wind, and many other roles. Chris was named a National Fisherman Highliner in 2022. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. These are the origins of solutions to our problems. In addressing this workshop, I kind of had to do a triage of what was going to get me first. Climate change or the solutions to it. Not really sure which is going to get us first. So I think initially we have to survive today to fight tomorrow, right? So what I listed as critical to our survival is the immediate funding for research, stock assessment research that has a really robust component of oceanography in it. Population dynamics doesn't take us anywhere. Population dynamics equates us to how radically fish can be moved by the temperature of the water, quality of the water, salinity of the water. So in order to fight tomorrow, we have to survive today. We need to have good stock assessments so that we do not overfish and we do not underfish. Neither one of those is acceptable. Let's see. Then we we are currently getting rim-racked by wind, and I don't think wind is going to be the last of it. We are going to be the victims of everyone's advances towards the ocean. So I think we need a foundational document that is the equivalent of the Magnuson Act for the development of the blue economy. Somewhere in the first paragraph of that document, it should say to do no harm. Things as complex as our oceans do not heal themselves after we have treated them poorly for an extended period of time. You know, harvesting aggregate, you know, sand, harvesting rocks, harvesting minerals in deep ocean valleys, things like that will all take a toll on the industry. So I'm concerned about, you know, the wind farm is a big deal, but it's only I think it's the tip of the iceberg. We need a national energy policy. If we had a national energy policy that was debated and that was settled upon, we would end up with a meritocracy of sources, each one competing against the next. And as one becomes ineffective or inefficient or produces poor outcomes, we would drop it out. It would allow for the oil companies to realize that this energy is currently fed on diesel fuel. So, you know, I'm not ashamed of the fact that I burn diesel fuel to feed the nation. None of us should be. I have switched one vessel over to a tier 3 compliant engine, and I think this entire industry should be looking to expand the funding for the DERA program, Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. That will pay 25 or 30% of the costs associated with taking out an old dirty engine and putting a clean one in. I think we could have a carbon neutral fishery in 15 years with proper funding. But as well-intentioned government programs go, this one is not helping the industry very much. It puts us in direct competition with municipalities. Municipalities have the luxury of a sane schedule. They know what they're expected to do. You know, the commercial industry decides it's time to repower when there's a piston hanging out the side of the block. That's usually when we think it's a good idea to get a new engine. And that puts us, you know, pretty much behind the 8 ball with that program. You know, this wind energy is a political fiat. We have not had a national debate. We have not determined cost versus projected cost. We have not determined maintenance costs versus projected maintenance, and we have not made logical assessments of how much electricity they actually can produce. This is a boondoggle of just incredible magnitude, and I'm scared to death. I just don't know who in the hell thought it was a good idea to pit renewable energy against renewable protein, given that one of the most damning tenets of climate change actually is, you know, the difficulty in producing food to feed a nation. So we have a lot of fears. I think one of the things that we have to start to do as a nation is to make investments in our natural infrastructure. How great would it be to have Narragansett Bay, Long Island Sound, and the Chesapeake transformed into carbon sequestration basins? Get the earth working with us as opposed to us working against it. I think we missed a glorious opportunity with the infrastructure bill and the 30 by 30 initiative. I think we could have tied things together and come away with healthy ecosystems and done away with a lot of carbon naturally, the way it used to be done. So we have to live to fight another day. So that's why I focused on, and the last one, I almost went right by it. We are being called upon right now by the government to develop climate-ready fisheries. I'm pretty involved in fishing. I'm not sure I know what the hell that is. anybody knows what that is, get back to me. I have some expectations about what it is and what it should be. And my notes involve the on the side I wrote, the empire of stupidity must fall. Currently, fishermen in North Carolina fish off New England and are asked to drive their fish back to North Carolina to deliver it. That's about an 800-mile ride. They're spending more time delivering fish than they are catching it. States and the federal government need to work to find a way to have us burn less fuel to harvest the same fish we have. They're not doing it. The harvesters are going to look into putting together a workshop where we can create a a fishery that is carbon sensitive and accountable simultaneously. They do not exclude each other. So we have no shortage of work. We have few people working on it, not enough. And thank God we have people like Sarah who are organizing our thoughts as best she can and focusing us on what needs to be done. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, that might be a bit too much to ask, but I am happy to bring you all together and celebrate all the work that is going on so that we can all learn from each other and build on this together. Thank you, Chris. Melanie Brown is our next speaker. Melanie is a salmon set net fisherman in Naknek, Alaska. She is also an organizer with Salmon State, which is an organization that advocates for science-based decision-making, precautionary management, and for Alaskans to have a voice in what happens to their wild salmon. And Melanie is also the chair of the Environmental Committee of the United Fishermen of Alaska. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you, Sarah, Goyana, for having me today. Yeah, my people found their way to Bristol Bay through the salmon. I strongly believe that to be true, that the salmon led my people there because they knew they would be provided for by the salmon. And I've witnessed the Bristol Bay fishery now for over 4 decades, believe it or not. I started fishing with my family when I was 10 years old in the late 70s, and I've seen some really fat and happy times, you know, high volume, good prices. Now we're enjoying really great volume. Bristol Bay appears to be a climate winner at this point in time. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not enjoying prices that keep up with inflation. We can thank farm fish for that, you know, for affecting the market. But I digress. We're here to talk about climate. So in the time that I have fished Bristol Bay, I've witnessed changes. You know, coastal erosion is a big factor. And, you know, that's caused by more extreme weather events that I've observed. Run timing has swung wildly over the time that I've observed the Bristol Bay fishery and participated in it. We've had unusually hot summers where there were huge fish die-offs, and fortunately we have enough genetic diversity and enough, you know, of a pool of genetics that when some creeks collapse due to heat factors, there are other places that do very well because, you know, perhaps their outfall of water is coming from a receding glacier that made the creek too cold for fish to thrive. But now we're kind of coming into, you know, an ideal temperature. The cool thing about the receding glaciers in the uplands of Bristol Bay is that it is creating more habitat. And my work with Salmon State has been very focused on the inshore environment. And I started my work with Salmon State because of concerns around the proposed pebble mine. And in some ways, I feel like that's the corollary to what's happening in coastal areas where fishermen are threatened by wind energy. It's sort of a different tie-in because mining, of course, happens in terrestrial environments, and the proposed Pebble mine is a copper deposit with some gold credits, and copper is a feature of wind energy, a necessary feature of renewable wind energy. And more we're seeing pressure on mines to be developed because of the need for renewable energy. And unfortunately, in many ways and in many situations, that is a false solution, because in the process of getting those minerals out of the ground, greenhouse gases are released, by tearing into the earth and into pockets of, rotting materials. And this is especially true of Bristol Bay because we're at the southern end of the permafrost. And when permafrost melts, a lot of gas is created. And, if that ground is disturbed, then the gas is released into the environment. So speaking in broader terms, outside of my own experience in Bristol Bay, and the initial work that Salmon State undertook, when it came to protecting wild salmon habitat and stocks in Alaska, we're now starting to focus more attention on concerns regarding the ocean space. In my mind and my thinking, I've viewed the ocean as sort of like an infinity, sort of like outer space. There's so much that is unknown. And yet we are starting to see the finiteness of even the ocean. And when it comes to finding solutions that might turn the ill effects of climate change around, I think that more management decision-making needs to be focused on types of fishing that degrade the ocean bottom and release carbon gases. Statistics show that types of fishing that touch the bottom and release gases even more than the aviation industry does in megatons of carbon emissions. And I would like to think that minor modifications could be made to the industry, to fishing industries that degrade the ocean bottom and that disturb ancient corals that provide buffering when it comes to ocean acidification, and sponges that provide habitat. So hopefully more attention will be paid to those things when fishing management decisions are made. And I definitely, Christopher, I appreciated what you said about we have to fight now. I'm not wording it as well as you, but we have to fight today so that we can fight tomorrow. But it's my hope that all of us collectively will find ways to think toward the future so that fishing will not stop with us, and that there will be fishing to be had for future generations, especially those of us who have brought our family into our fishing practices. I myself have 2 children that continue to fish with me in Bristol Bay, and I'd like to think that we can keep our fishing operation going beyond the 5th generation that my children represent of commercial fishers in Bristol Bay, and that people whose lifeways and culture are tied to fishing practices will be able to continue to participate in their cultures or regain connection to their fishing practices. There are many people in Alaska now that have had to stand down, and I think it's a culmination of a number of effects, including climate. And I just hope that it's not too late for us to find ways to reverse the effects that we're observing when it comes to climate change. That's all I have for my opening remarks. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Melody, and thanks for all of the great work you've done to protect Bristol Bay. So our second to last speaker is Mike Conroy. He is a consultant, a former California commercial and charter boat fisherman, a former executive director of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association, and is currently the West Coast coordinator for the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, or RODA, which is a broad membership-based coalition of fishing industry associations and fishing companies committed to improving the compatibility of new offshore development with their businesses. Welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for putting this together. And thanks to folks who spoke before me, who said a lot of what I was going to say. In terms of pressing issues and concerns, obviously offshore wind is a primary look on the West Coast. Fully agree with Lori's comments. As she touched on the leap before you look approach that's currently being undertaken by the feds, that's key. In recent months, we've seen more and more science and previously unpublished agency letters highlighting potential impacts of offshore wind on upwelling, protected species, lower levels of the food chain, and larval transport systems. And the bucket of the things that we don't know still greatly outweighs that which we do know. Regardless, we should not destroy the ecological function of the California current, chasing unproven technology. Decades ago, hydroelectric power generated by dams was the shiny penny on the ground. Now, based in part on habitat, fishery, and cultural impacts, there are more and more efforts to remove them. We must not repeat the mistakes from the past. Another pressing issue is obviously droughts impacts on fisheries, and in particular salmon. California salmon and the fisheries and cultures which depend on them are in dire straits. The last 2 years, natural production in California river systems have been abysmal. The waters in the rivers are too warm, even for high survival of hatchery-produced fish released at the hatchery. And mitigation measures, for example, trucking, have had to be used. Another big pressing issue is an uneducated or an undereducated electorate and regulatory body. And a perfect example of that is the recent actions by the California Air Resources Board in dealing with their commercial hovercraft exemption for emission standards. They had proposed rules that would have required commercial and charter vessels to have tier 4 engines placed in their vessels. I think it was by 2025. That technology doesn't exist, and doesn't exist in a scale that is workable for boats of our size. So, thankfully, after educating them, we were able to get the rules on that change. We have till 2030 now to get up to tier 3. But, we've seen this time and time again, and not just with regard to emission standards, but even in the offshore wind sphere, just an uneducated, undereducated electorate and regulatory body. So in terms of how we've been mobilizing, and fully agree with what Lori said also about how the grassroots methodology has been worked very well on the West Coast with regard to offshore wind. But what in particular we've been doing is taking educating as a key role, and not only the aforementioned electorate and agency folks, but also the fishing industry. It is kind of mind-boggling to me that the number of folks that I speak with or to about offshore wind who number one, haven't really heard that it's coming, number two, don't understand it, and number three, are just taking the approach, oh, that's not going to happen, they'll come to their senses and this won't be a thing. So to the extent that we can share knowledge, share experiences, and ensure that we're all speaking the same language, and sharing our concerns, I think that's going to be very important. Promoting our products and services. As previous speakers have noted, food security is taking a backseat to renewables and other activities. We have to highlight what it is that we do, what it is that we provide, and as Lori pointed out, that we provide it at a much lower carbon footprint than other forms of protein that are produced domestically. We also have to change the conversation, specifically with regard to offshore wind and renewable energies, supplies, and the like. Those all address supply. When were we going to start talking about reducing our energy demands? Looking for actions with real co-benefits. One example that's coming to light here in California is strategically placed solar panels. They're talking about putting solar panels over the California aqueduct. This would not only help the water supply, like saving from evaporation, but I think I read a study where we could generate 8 gigawatts of energy by putting solar panels over all of California's freshwater transport systems. Then you've got a bill that was introduced by Congressman Huffman at the end of last year that was designed to study the feasibility of putting solar panels all over federally owned reservoirs. You know, things like that, which will hinder evaporation, you know, reduce draws on especially in California's water supply, which is kind of odd to say in the middle of a storm of the century, but we're still in severe drought. I think somebody mentioned kelp habitat restoration and creation. That's something that could have real co-benefits. And then potentially the federal efforts on 30 by 30, the first 30 by 30, you know, but if the fishing industry is not meaningfully involved in those conversations, then the likelihood of any co-benefits coming from the 30 by 30 efforts is likely not going to happen. And above all else, we have to ensure that the fishing industry's knowledge and experience is not only captured, but also communicated. You know, I've recently participated in a workshop on ocean acidification. It's a perfect example of the disconnect between science and the fishing industry. You know, hopefully conversations that took place during that workshop will lead to partnerships between the fishing industry and scientists studying ocean acidification, so that we're not, you know, operating in different worlds. Just for those of you who aren't worried about ocean acidification, especially if you're a crab fisherman along the West Coast, you should be. So I'll stop for now and look forward to the conversations as well. Thanks.
Thank you. And on that light note, thank you, Mike. And last, we have David Gaithel. David is a former owner and operator of the FE Ellen Diane, an inshore groundfish dragger out of Hampton, New Hampshire. He served 2 terms on the New England Fisheries Management Council and is a member of the Yankee Fishermen's Co-op. David was named a National Fisherman Highliner in 2004. Welcome, David.
Hi, everybody. Much like fishermen displaced by wind farms, I've displaced 2 parrots from this room. So if you hear some noise in the background, they're voicing their displeasure. So let's get right into it. I will say right up front that I think climate concerns are dwarfed by the current proposed solutions, which are hideously expensive, have unattainable energy goals, and are bad for both the fish and the fishermen. Wind power, whether floating or fixed, is bad for both fishermen and fish. And by fish, I mean everything from the largest mammals to the smallest invertebrates that inhabit the continental shelf. The effects on fishermen are fairly obvious. There's, as has been mentioned numerous times, displacement, but there are also cumulative impacts, such as loss of survey tows, which leads to greater uncertainty in assessments, which leads to ultimately lower quotas because there's more uncertainty. So fishermen get hit twice. First, you lose the places you can catch something, then you have greater uncertainty in the assessments and you get a smaller quota to use what part of the ocean is left. There's loss of community. A lot of New England is tied closely to fishing. Remove fishing boats from a number of these communities in New England and the communities will have no reason to exist. And finally, there's the loss of waterfront access. We've already seen it in New England. The state pier in Connecticut has displaced fishing boats for wind build out. New Bedford, same thing. Salem, Massachusetts, they want to do the same thing. Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They want to take the state piers there and turn it into a wind build out facility. Where are the boats that tie up there now going to go? However, those are fairly understandable, but the effects on fish are far more subtle and, to my view, far more dangerous. Europe built first and studied later. The electromagnetic fields created by bringing this power ashore have been found so far in some of the more recent studies that are published, cause death of larval juvenile lobsters and massive changes in the dispersal of larval haddock. These are 2 of the major New England fisheries. Other changes may be tougher to detect, such as changes in currents, the so-called downstream effect or downwind effect, which will affect the dispersal of plankton and, again, other types of larval fish. So there's some real danger here, and there's no studying going on in this country. And if the biological effects were not bad enough, politically, no one is listening. I think everybody on here can agree. And now most of the fishermen on this call are used to dealing with NOAA. One thing you can say about NOAA, they're predictable for good or bad. You kind of know where they're going and what they're doing, and you can insert yourself into the process. Most fishermen that I've talked to, on the other hand, dealing with BOEM is completely unpredictable. They're kind of like a sci-fi shapeshifter. They are also on a mission to lease first and ask questions later. This makes effective comment very difficult. People in New Hampshire, there's 4 of us that are working on this, have spent hours reading journal articles and culling information to make quantitative comments required by BOEM, because they won't accept qualitative comments. You've got to produce something hard at the table. And what's even more frustrating is once you finally do all that research and produce those comments, you're never stressed. You know, they're just checking a box. The state government, at least in my state, is overwhelmed. They don't have the staff to produce the comments that are required on these very short timelines. And in a number of other states in New England, they're under the hypnotic sway of the false job mantra from the companies. Why I say false jobs? Because there are no good paying jobs in this. Our interstate transport of goods is covered by the Jones Act. I could spend a lot more than 5 minutes talking about that, but that's where the high paying jobs would be. And these companies have already figured out ways around it. They're going to bring things from Europe all the way across the Atlantic, never touch the United States shore, and build this stuff out using low paid third world country labor. So now for climate solutions, I feel we need to offer reliable, cost-effective power. In New England, that means transmission lines from Hydro-Quebec, which is currently flushing 85% of its power down the St. Lawrence River, because Canada only needs 15% of it, and building out nuclear power plants. I know people may disagree with me on this, but nuclear power plants, I live 2 miles from one. I've lived there for 30 years. A nuclear power plant with an adequate cooling system, which Seabrook has, can produce enormous amounts of power and has absolutely no effect on the environment whatsoever. You know, people fish right around the discharge cones from this. There's no change in temperature detected 100 feet away. We also need to anticipate different solutions for different regions, such as pocket nuke plants, which is a new technology. You can read about it in Time magazine. They had a big cover article on it in the fall. These are very small plants with much smaller cooling footprints that would say power a community of 100,000 people. And finally, local fishermen in my area are ignoring the issue. People ask, what are you doing about it? Well, they're ignoring it. They're distracted by short-term issues such as right whales, low quotas, high fuel prices, and things of that nature. There's a handful of retired fishermen in New Hampshire that have the advantage of long histories in the fishery and understand how politicians and communities can be overwhelmed with multinational money and promises that are just, we're the ones fighting the battle. Our average age is 70. We're not going to be here. We need to somehow transfer what we know to the younger generations in how to do this. We fought battles such as in the past, such as keeping Aristotle Onassis, the world's richest man at the time, from building an oil refinery on islands off our coast. We made sure Seabrook had an environmentally sound cooling system. We need to engage the next 3 generations to, carry this fight, as well as to learn how to defeat multinationals on a shoestring budget. I mean, you're talking about people who are going to have bake sales and whatnot versus people that can drop $1 billion by just snapping their finger. So with that, I'll conclude and wait for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of our panelists. I have to say, I'm just taking all of this in. None of it is none of it is new to me. I don't think any of it is surprising to any of us, but just seeing all of this picture painted before us by these 6 panelists is just sort of overwhelming in terms of the sheer magnitude of different kinds of disaster and vulnerability that this industry is facing just from the climate and climate solutions arena alone, not to mention some of the other things that David alluded to with regular old fisheries management, graying of the fleet, gentrification, and all of that run-of-the-mill daily stressors. And to me, what is so overwhelming about all of this is obviously people are mobilizing in their communities, people are already working together across the country and regionally on all of these issues, and are doing so with a lot of innovation and figuring out how to get it done. But at the same time, these issues are moving so fast that in order for us as an industry to keep up, we have to really be on our game. And I'm hoping to come out of this webinar with the rest of you with a little bit more direction myself on how to improve my game a little bit and how to help all of us improve our game so that we can keep up with the pace of these needs. We are technically supposed to end at 3, but I will stay on as long as anybody else wants to stay on to have a group discussion. If people want to fade out, you know, to get on with their day, that is okay. But you are all welcome to stay past the 3 o'clock end time. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a group discussion. It's open to everyone to participate in. I am going to keep each comment to 1 minute, and I'm going to have a stopwatch going, and I will cut you off because we have a very big group here and we only have 9 minutes. I'm running into it myself right now. But the prompt for this discussion is, based on what you've heard today, what are the common threads that we've heard from some of these speakers? And what are some ways that we as an industry can better support each other across regions? And I'm going to go region by region. I think everyone on this call is either in Alaska, the West Coast, or the Northeast. So I will start with Alaska, and we'll take one comment from Alaska first, and then we'll go around the region. So is there anyone from Alaska who would like to make a 1-minute comment? Please raise your hand. West Coast will be next. Kent. Kent, you're
Thank
up.
you. Yeah, I would, you know, the common thread I hear, and it comes from my preconceived notions and, you know, all the stuff that's inside of my head, is I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that use of fossil fuels are responsible for the largest part of the emissions, which are, you know, pumped into the atmosphere and which are contributing or driving climate change. And so we, you know, at some point we need to deal with that and deal with it in a way that's large enough to make the difference. 27 former Nobel laureates, 5 different economic advisors over many administrations, and a whole host of conservative Republican statesmen. And 3,500 economists in academia say that the biggest market failure in history is the failure to account for the costs of the burning of fossil fuels, and we need to put a price on carbon to start accounting for those costs. And we will evolve to a world where we don't depend on fossil fuels.
Thank you, Kent. So we have Kent chiming in with a recommendation for putting a price on carbon. Anyone?
Sarah,
Sarah, you're
we
muted.
lost
How are you?
you.
Oh, I'm
Will you
sorry. I was.
restate, please.
Yeah. So thank you for that comment, Kent. So we're going to go in regional order. So next is West Coast, followed by New England. Is there anyone from the West Coast who would like to make a very brief 1-minute observation on what we've heard today? Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Just real quickly, you know, I hear a lot of people saying we need to work together, and I agree with that. But I think the other thing that's important is that across regions, across the hallway, you can't say one thing in one room and something else in another. And if we want to work together, then I think people need to stop pointing fingers at other gear types, and they need to really sit down and think about ways we can work together. It makes it kind of difficult to do that, when you have people either spreading misinformation or, you know, accusing your gear type of doing something that is not based in reality. And so, you know, I think it's important to work together, and I think we have a real issue with climate, but what you say in one room matters. You have to be consistent across arenas. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Heather. Anyone on the East Coast want to chime in? Frank.
Yeah, good afternoon. I just like to say that I think that something that we can do as fishermen that actually has some consequence would be to invest in efficiencies on our own boats, in the system that we use to catch fish, deliver fish, process fish, that all these large scale changes that we hear about, you know, building nuclear plants is great. I personally agree with that, but we need to fix fishing. And I think changing engines, new gear technologies, better means of moving energy around, ice, chilling, that sort of thing. We need to invest in this equipment. I think we could probably cut our energy consumption in half and still produce the amounts of fish that we're producing today. We could probably increase our production of fish substantially by looking at the regulations and how they're impacting our ability to fish on shifting fish stocks. For example, here in New England, we have scallop and butterfish that we never had before. We can't fish on them because of the regulations that are in place. So those are fairly simple, low trophic level changes that we could make that would make fishing profitable, continue to produce food, have a positive impact overall on climate change, and not totally disrupt the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And I am going to start using that term, low trophic level changes instead of low hanging fruit. I like that. I see Chris has his hand raised, but I'm going to go back around the regions. Do we have anyone who's from a region that I haven't mentioned? Somewhere other than Alaska, New England, and the West Coast? I don't think we do. So I'm going to go back to Alaska, then the West Coast, and then I'll come back to you, Chris. Alaska, any Alaskans we haven't heard from yet, or that we have? Panelists can also chime in if we don't have anyone else. So Melanie and Jamie can, oh, we've got Kent again. Go ahead, Kent. Kent, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I'll just follow up on, and you know, if we begin to account for the cost of burning those fossil fuels, it'll greatly incentivize development of alternative, you know, to the fossil fuels and drive costs down. And it's really a market-driven approach that uses the market to repair what economists have described as the biggest market failure in history. The external costs of those fuels have never been accounted for. In fact, we subsidize and continue to subsidize the oil and gas industry to a really huge degree. And so we need to quit subsidizing the industry and start accounting for the costs. And then all the solutions become easier, and the market will drive change. Thanks.
Thank you, Kent. Anyone else from the West Coast want to weigh in with an observation? Okay, Chris, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think what is common to all of us is that we are victims of leaders who refuse to lead properly. Leading properly is hard. It has been equated to sausage making. You know, it's, you get in and you fight and you argue and you concede and you win a little, you lose a lot, and you come out of it with a shared vision. We don't have that in this country. The entire wind energy process is a political fiat. It has empowered BOEM to a point where it has become a rogue agency. They are compelled by nothing that it's spin, baby, spin, drill, baby, drill, or it just doesn't matter. They have actually been captured by the financial wizardry of their clients. They no longer call the tune. they are being told what to do. So we need to have a national energy policy. We need to have leaders that are capable of looking at both ends of the energy formula, how much we use, how much we produce, and how we produce it. We need to be able to have more patience than a three-year-old kid on sugar, and dig in and get some of this stuff done. This nation does nothing great anymore. When I was a small boy, we used to build great things. We used to go to the moon. We did enormously wonderful, magnificent things as a nation, and now we're investing wholeheartedly in putting us the most dependable economic engine in the country, the commercial industry, out of business with a whim, with a whisper in the wind. So I think we're in desperate need of a new brand of politician, and our expectations should be raised and ask for things specifically. National energy policy that has so many different elements would be better than this. There's going to be no one accountable. This thing is being made right now, so it's too big to fail. And that's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to get too big to fail, and it's going to bleed us forever. So I just, unfortunately, politics occur downstream of bad events. And we're going to have to just get better at instructing our politicians as to what we want. And a rogue agency calling all the shots is not it.
Thank you, Chris. Buck, did you want to say something? I saw you had your hand up. I'll come back to Alaska. I saw Buck had his hand raised from the West Coast. Would you like to speak?
Sure.
Thanks.
I appreciate this panel. It's something that, we've had to deal with is hydroelectricity dams, but we're also dealing with green energy, and it's, green energy. What are we going to do with the waste of these batteries that they're talking about? And a lot of the places that they're proposing to get some of these resources are on tribal lands, and they're attacking tribal lands. And I just think that what was said about the wind energy by Lori is very true. That this there's not there's as much negative, at least in my eyes, as there is in the positives of energy, of this new energy. It's it is, like I said, it really has impacts for our tribal people with some of this green energy that they're trying to get these resources from. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Buck. We have a couple of New Englanders with hands raised, but let me just make sure, is there anyone else from Alaska who wants to say a few words? Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, Eric here in Sitka, Alaska. First of all, I was really impressed by the panelists and the presentations. It made me think and made me learn. Second of all, I really appreciate the work that you've done on putting this together, Sarah, and all the other activists on here. If we're here, we're informed and we're doing stuff to take time out of our busy day to do this. Third, Pacific Fishing just came out with an article about how Alaska fishermen aren't doing stuff on climate change. Well, I immediately contacted Sarah and some other people and Wesley Loy, who's the editor, about what we're doing right here in Sitka. Personally, I'm converting my boat to electric diesel. That's a big project. We might not get it done this winter, but we're going to get it done by next winter for sure. Alpha's raising a lot of money, and I'm putting in money. Our Fish and Game Advisory Committee, which is mostly fishermen, voted unanimously over 2 years ago to declare a climate emergency in the Sitka area. Linda Bacon and Kent Barkow, they're already testing electric devices on their boat. And we're doing a lot here, so we need some positive publicity about what people are already doing. Second, there's a comment made on the chat about let's all unite. Well, I've facilitated groups to make long-term plans by consensus that we're suing each other outside of the forum. My experience in fishery politics is you work like hell together and unite on common ground, but you still fight out your differences in the other arenas. And one common ground we all have here is we're concerned about the climate catastrophe that's coming, and we're going to work together to adapt as best as possible in the fishing industry to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Jim Kendall.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to see everyone still on here. Listen, a little bit of good news for a change is that the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives just put out a press release in conjunction with the Massachusetts Fishermen's Partnership and the Fishing Partnership Support Services, probably three of the main groups here in Massachusetts, that we're about to receive a $2 million grant, or slightly less than a $2 million grant, to work on what they call energy efficient fisheries, where we're going to start investigating how we might repower some of our vessels and even some of our plants. This isn't restricted just to vessels. This is the fishery wide here in Massachusetts, and I would hope to see the same program expand throughout the fishing areas. And this was brought about in large part by Senator Markey, who worked hard to get us this grant. And like I said, we're pretty happy about it. It's a step forward. We're not quite sure how far we're going to be able to get with it. $2 million sounds like a lot of money, but today's prices, you don't go quite so far. But anyways, I thought that might be a little bit of good news to interject here when we're all aware of the problems. Like I said, we're going to start looking for the good things. Thank you.
Thank you for that really exciting piece of news, Jim. Since we're after time, I'm not going to worry about the regional representation. I will just call on people in the order they raise their hands, and I see Fred Matera's hand is up. So go ahead, Fred.
Yes, Sarah, thanks again for coordinating and putting this together. The presenters as well, and all those attending. That's great news to hear, Jim. I wasn't aware of that. I was aware that we had, in the last year and a half, requested funding from our congressionals, and Sarah was very instrumental in putting that together as well. So this is great because this could create a pilot program, and it would incentivize those. I listened to Frank talk about, how do we change? We need to do it ourselves. We need to reduce that carbon footprint, and we need to take on that responsibility. But so many fishermen are just so stressed out to just survive, to just make it week to week to week. So something like this will incentivize them, and hopefully we can get more funding. Once they see that this is doable, it works, I'm assuming we can get more into the regions throughout the nation. So excellent. We talked about educating, and here we are educating right now. You got 47 people that have attended. A lot of us have had these discussions for years, especially here in the Northeast. But yet I've gone to public hearings, I've gone to comment periods, and there may be 60 people in the audience, and 20 of us are fishermen, and we bellyache and complain and give them whatever reasons why we believe this is detrimental to our industry. But the other 40 people that are there, they're 100% behind it. I've listened to young women get up and say, I won't even have a baby until we change what's happening here with our, climate change issues. So how do we do that? Because we banter back and forth, but I've been doing this. I've been bantering for 50 years about fishing regulations. Where's that got us? It's worse now than it was 50 years ago. But what we do need to do is start to catalog all of this research that proves and is demonstrating that's viable, and put it into a catalog so that anytime we go and we speak, here's this catalog, here's all of these projects and research that's proven it's detrimental. Electromagnetic fields, noise is detrimental, lobby disbursement, on and on and on. This is what we have to stop. We have to build this coalition of the reasons why it is detrimental, because just little sound bites from us, you can see it. It has a teeny impact, but not anything that's going to turn it around. And I think, that's what we have to do. There's enough of us on the right coalitions and groups and Rhoda and everything that we can compile this. That's just my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, just for your information, Fred, the press release just came out a day or two ago about that grant. So it's, like I say, it's fresh news for a change.
And Fred, I have a half-written email to you with the press release thanking you for your help talking to Senator Reid, and I just haven't sent it. So you heard it first from Jim, but that's okay. For everyone else, you know what, I'll send that to all of you, because it is an exciting example of what happens when people work together. And the backstory behind that Massachusetts $2 million grant is actually that came about because of collaborations that were formed through the Fishery Friendly Climate Action Campaign. And we managed to pull in $2 million. So that's the kind of thing that can happen when we put our heads together and look for solutions. Jeffrey Gardner is writing something in the chat. Did you want to speak, Jeffrey, and share that with all of us? Okay. I guess not. So yeah, I'll go ahead. Did you want to? Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to voice those thoughts before I wrap it up, just in case people don't have a chance to see the chat?
Yeah, I can just wing it. Okay, I'm technically a fisherman. I'm a shellfish farmer. I've been doing that for like 35 years. A lot of people know me. I share a lot of common ground. Not everything, a lot of common ground. One of the things that I see with the wind farms, from a Rhode Island perspective, is I can't talk to my friends about wind farms and anything wrong with it. I can't talk to, I think I should use the word U.S. Senator, because he's so keen on everything and it's all the grooviest thing in the world. People will not listen. And there's so many things. The Jones Act, things are supposed to be made in the boats in the U.S., food from the U.S. There's exemptions going on for that. What about all these things, or all the electrical things? There's so much that hasn't been looked at. But I think the biggest problem that all fishermen have, and shellfish farmers and agriculture, is people look at us with, we're stick eyes. And we can't get past that conversation with our families, our friends, our normal associates. You say, well, I'm not sure about that, and they turn you right off. We need to find a way, and I don't have the answer, find a way for people to be able to talk and listen to each other about these things, rather than do the quick rush in. Somebody said, we're in a rush to get a solution before understanding the solution. And I think that that's what's, we have problems. We need to find a solution. Some of these things we're rushing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us. All right, so I'm going to wrap things up here. Just want to really thank all of you, especially for staying on after the scheduled end of time. I want to thank our panelists, Jamie, Melanie, Chris, David, Mike, and Lori. I want to thank you not just for speaking today, but for all that you are doing in your communities and your region. And that goes for the rest of you as well. Clearly, we are faced with some unprecedented challenges in this industry, and that's not going to change. That's the way it's going to be from here on out. But clearly, we are rising to those challenges. This was deeply inspiring and energizing and motivating. And please let me know how else I can help facilitate more of these connections across regions in the future through the Fishery Friendly Climate Action Campaign. In that regard, I want to make sure you all have seen the news about our next webinar on January 24th. It's called Conservative and Care About Climate Change. You have a special role to play. So this is specifically for conservative leaning fishermen who may not always feel comfortable talking about climate change because it may be perceived as a quote unquote left-wing issue. It is not. It is an issue that affects everyone, and we all need to be comfortable talking about it, both within members of our own political shared communities and across the aisle. And we have a really special guest, Bob Inglis, who is a former South Carolina Republican senator or representative, and the founder and executive director of Republic-N, which is an organization specifically dedicated towards helping conservatives get comfortable talking about and acting on climate change. So this webinar is for everyone, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. But please help by making sure that your friends, especially your conservative fishing friends who might not be the first to sign up for a climate change webinar, we want them to sign up because this webinar is specifically for them on January 24th. A recording of this will be posted on the Fishery Friendly Climate Action website and shared to the listserv. All of you will be added to the Fishery Friendly Climate listserv unless I'm not sure who you are, in which case I may have to reach out to you to find out whether you're an active member of the fishing industry. We do limit that listserv to people who are members of the fishing industry or their appointed representatives, just because we treat this as a special affinity group where we can have private conversations among this industry before going out and talking with others in the NGO, academic, or government community. So thank you for respecting that. And thank you everyone again for joining us today. Please stay in touch. Don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time. And thank you again to our wonderful speakers.
So long,
Thank you,
everyone.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Way to go, Sarah. Good job.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.